This is Dave. In this podcast, for the most part, we focus on the Christian aspects of growing an effective Christian business. What sets a Christian business apart from the rest of the world. But sometimes we focus on the things to do to build a successful business, whether or not it's Christian or not. And, for 30 years, I have been a consultant and a trainer and speaker to businesses and Salesforce, B2B sales forces and businesses. And we got a lot of content, a wealth of material on how to grow an effective business-to-business business. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. Today it's not necessarily Christian. It is best practices for building a business-to-business sales system. How well are you managing your sales system? We're going to look at today probably the thing that maybe all business-to-business companies do in terms of their sales efforts, and we're going to talk about how to do it better. And very specifically, we're talking about creating a client. Now, there are lots of definitions of sales, and in my work of refining sales systems and helping salespeople sell better, I've found this definition to be helpful. Here's a definition. Sales is the process of methodically moving people closer and closer into a committed economic relationship with your company. So the focus of your thoughts and actions is on the customer and his or her relationship with your company. Now, when I do this live, I have a diagram that I show on the slide, so you're just going to have to picture it. But if you can picture a spectrum from left to right, and on the left side is a picture of the globe, the world. And I call that the world of apathy and ignorance. In the world of apathy and ignorance, that's where your suspects live. And that's the first. Now, as we move from the far left, the world of apathy and ignorance, to the right, we're going to have another column that says suspect. And a suspect is someone that you suspect might one day do business with you. You reach into the world of apathy and ignorance and identify some suspects. Then the next space to the right is prospect. So we go from apathy and ignorance to suspect to prospect. And a prospect is someone who can legitimately do business with you, can make or influence the decision, and can pay for it. And then, of course, we move to the next. As we move further and further to the right, we come to a customer. The customer, of course, is someone who gives you money. When money changes hands the first time, the person becomes a customer. That is, for most salespeople, the most difficult part of the sales process. But we have two more spaces left. And the next one to the right is turning a customer into a client. And that's what we're going to focus on today. What's a client? It's a customer who has become someone who buys over and over again on a regular basis. And just to complete the diagram, the last space on the spectrum is a partner. And a partner is someone who buys as much as they can from you, almost everything from you. Just can't imagine that they could do business without you. You are an integral part of their business. So the first job of the sales system is to reach into the world of apathy and ignorance and identify some suspects. And then we turn some of them into prospects and some of them into customers, and then some of the customers into clients, and that's what we're going to focus on today. When we look at the big picture process, what I call the big picture sales process, you'll note that there are three sort of separate sub-processes. Creating a customer is one separate issue all by itself. Developing a client is the next, and generating a partner is next. So in a typical sales system, each of these requires a special set of resources and personnel, tools, and processes. So it's really helpful to look at each of these three kind of sub-processes individually. Now, whereas acquiring a customer typically requires an investment. In other words, you generally lose money on acquiring a customer. The next step, which is the one we're talking about today, creating a client, that generally is where you recoup the investment and you start to make your sales system profitable. It's typical of most selling organizations to delegate this process to the sales force. And this is where, honestly, most salespeople spend most of their time. Unlike acquiring a customer, which may not happen at all if it's entirely delegated to the sales force, because this process is easier and more lucrative, it's likely happening every day in your organization. So the issue is not making it happen, making the client creation process happen. The issue is doing it better. And alas, most salespeople don't do it well, and most sales organizations don't manage it well. And that's what we're going to focus on. So here's the typical scenario. Salesperson inherits a set of customers and dutifully makes the rounds. Over time, he or she is naturally drawn to some customers with whom he feels some natural affinity. They just get along. And those customers like the salesperson, so that salesperson naturally finds himself or herself spending more time with them. And all that sounds reasonable. The problem is that the determinant of the salesperson's time is the salesperson's feelings and comfort zones. These are not the most effective basis on which to determine the application of your assets. In this case, your asset being the salesperson's time and energy. You ought to have a more strategic criteria for how you invest those assets. So for 30 years, I've been proclaiming the wisdom of measuring the potential of each customer, classifying customers into priority groups based on that potential, and then directing the sales force to spend the most time on the highest potential. And that is what we want to focus on. That is the key to creating clients more effectively. Let me repeat that. So the process is to measure the potential of each customer, and then, based on that potential, classify each customer into priority groups, and then direct the sales force to spend the most time with the highest potential. Sounds so simple, doesn't it? But man, I'll tell you, it is incredibly difficult to pull off. What seems so simple and straightforward really takes a concerted, organized effort to make it happen. Most organizations are miles away from making this process happen systematically and effectively. For example, I have personally and contractually worked with over 500 sales organizations. I have only one time, come into a business and discovered that they already had a requirement that the salespeople collect information on a customer's potential and then a system in place to record and use that information. 1 out of 500. Amazing. If you understand that the definition of a client is a customer who buys routinely, then the key to doing this well is to expand the business with those customers who are worth the time and effort. Doesn't it make sense that we have some way to measure when that has happened? It's not just measured by the volume of sales dollars coming out of an account, and this is where we're starting to fine-tune here a little bit. It's not just sales dollars. They could be just buying more of the same thing, which only meets the minimum definition of expanding the business. A higher value definition would be to measure the increase in the number of items, SKUs, purchased in the key accounts. So the measurement of success of this process would be reflected in the breadth of products and services the key customers bought. So in other words, if you sell, let's say you're selling cutting tools and abrasives to manufacturers, and one customer buys more of a particular cutting tool because he has a new contract that requires more of its use, okay, that's good, but it's better when he buys more than one cutting tool and when he buys your abrasives as well. You see, the number of items that a customer buys is a better indication of how important you are becoming to that customer. If it's one item, that's okay, but if it's 15 items, that means you're more important and your salesperson is more active. And if that's the case, then you're expanding the business and you're becoming more important in that account. You're wringing more value out of that asset. In my 30 years of working, again, personally and contractually with over 500 different companies, I have never yet come into an organization and found that they were measuring the increase in the number of items purchased in their key accounts. In other words, very, very few companies think to measure it. And that is unfortunate because that is the single most effective measurement of the penetration of key accounts, which is how you define creating a client more effectively. Are you following me? So, as in every key process, each of the three fundamental processes I mentioned earlier, creating a customer, creating a client, developing a partner, and with each of those three, there's a process to follow to do this better. Number one, understand the process, the big picture process that I just talked about. Number two, describe it for your business. So what you're going to do is decide what it looks like for a customer to become a client. And very specifically, to become a client that has potential for growth and that rewards the salesperson for investing their time. What are the key activities that must happen if that is going to happen? And you might say something like, well, our salesperson has to present additional products or services. Okay, so that's something we can measure. That's a behavior. So let's say we measure that. We measure the number of items purchased in an account. And so now we've got two measurements here. One is the number of presentations. The other is the number of items purchased. That's okay to get started. I mean, those two simple, pretty fundamental measurements. So now let's measure those. Let's create a way to measure each of those every month, and then determine and then compare one month to the other, and compare one month to some goals. So if you want to do this well, you say we're going to measure the number of presentations made in customer accounts by our salespeople, and we're going to do that by taking the information off our CRM system, and we're going to create a goal of a systems-wide of 50 presentations a month, and we're going to compare our actual measurements to that goal. Perfect. Now now you're creating this thing. You're looking at it like a system. You're measuring the pieces of the system, and you're reflecting on those and making adjustments every month. So every month you're going to measure two things: the number of presentations made and the number of additional items purchased in key accounts. So there you go. Now you create a goal. We just talked about that, and then you look at those measurements every month and compare it to your goal. And you say, what can we do? First of all, are we happy with the results? And if so, fine, don't do anything. But if you think it could be improved, then you ask the question, how can we do better at this? And you brainstorm that, and you find one solution, and you put that solution in place, and then you measure it again next month. And you do that over and over again until your system is just humming right along. You're turning customers into clients, and high-potential clients. You're making a lot of money. Your salespeople are being effective, and everything is bright and cheerful in the world. Okay? Hey, that's it. We're done. Bye-bye.